We knew it was coming, and it's still hard to come to terms with. Nick Chubb will not be back with the Cleveland Browns in 2025. We'll talk about it coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast, and proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. The Nick Chubb era is officially over in Cleveland. We will get through it together here, starting with this episode. Also, we look back at the top 5 Nick Chubb moments, and Andrew Berry sounds pretty comfortable throwing around the R word. First, though, I do want to thank you for being in every day with the Locked On Browns podcast, making us your first listen every single day. Remember, you can find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday, guaranteed, with bonus content on some weekends as well, and it's totally free to you. Just hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you get your podcast, and of course at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. You can also get involved in the show by sharing your thoughts on anything we discuss today in the comment section. This is your team, so be part of the conversation every single day. And yes, Nick Chubb, as we've been sort of anticipating, is not expected to be back with the Cleveland Browns. And now it's even more official. Multiple reports have him headed to the Houston Texans. As of this recording, it is pending a physical, but it sounds like that is going to be his new home. And as I said in the intro there, we all kind of knew this was coming. It's not a surprise. I think the final nail in the coffin, first of all, like, earlier this offseason, Andrew Berry, I think, tried to prepare people for the worst case scenario, which would, of course, be that Nick Chubb wasn't going to be back. He made it clear they were going to let him test free agency. You know, he made it clear they were going to have conversations, but the rhetoric around the situation was much different than a year ago, when you had Andrew Berry sitting up there and telling fans, this isn't how we want to see Nick Chubb go out. We don't want to see him end his Browns tenure with this knee situation. Like, he'll be back in 2025. He promised, 2024. He promised you that. He kept his promise this year. There was no promises. It was all just business. It was business rhetoric. It was business. You know, the way he framed everything, that they were going to just kind of let the process play out. And as it played out, they couldn't come to terms on a deal. He's headed likely to Houston, and the Browns pivoted to, before the draft, after their conversations weren't leading to anything, hey, we're going to sort of blaze this new path forward with 2 young running backs and take 2 in the NFL draft. And they did that. And this is the running back situation that you have. And I want to be clear, like, reflecting on Nick Chubb's time here doesn't have to be a shot at those guys. I think Quinshon Judkins has a chance to be really good. I think him and Dylan Sampson together have a chance to be a nice 1-2 punch that this franchise probably hasn't seen since Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt were paired together. And I was wrong, because I went through most of the offseason believing that, you know, it was the easiest PR move this team could make to bring back Nick Chubb, especially given everything in the aftermath of the Deshaun Watson situation, the fact that they're basically signaling that they're moving off of that and moving on, and ready to, you know, find their next quarterback somewhere else. It felt like an easy sell to the fans and just to everybody, like, hey, Nick Chubb's going to be back here. We're going to give you that, and we'll see if he can get back to being close to that player that he used to be. And so I really thought they'd figure it out, because it was an easy win-win for both sides. Nick Chubb wants to be here. He wanted to be here. And, you know, it was fans love him. But it didn't happen, and so I can admit that I was wrong about that. I sort of known that, obviously, since the draft when they took the 2 running backs. And it is going to be weird seeing him in a different uniform, because, frankly, like, this was a player that we thought was going to finish his career with the Cleveland Browns, and it felt like that was the way his career should end, frankly. It's going to be a while until someone that resonated with the fan base and represents the city the way Chubb did. Like, until they find somebody, it's going to be a while until they find somebody who does what Chubb did. Like, resonated that strongly with the fans, and represented the city, the team, everything so profoundly, just in his actions and the way that he played football. He was the epitome of what the city, you know, cares for as a blue collar town. And it's again, just a strange and unfortunate way to see it all come to an end, especially with it being injuries that kind of derailed it here. Not even like, hey, he just had to retire. Like you didn't really get a good he didn't really get a good send off from a place that adored him and that he adored. The only thing I can think of in terms of a player that maybe reaches the status that Nick Chubb had here would be like if they find that franchise quarterback, if it's Shador, if it's Dylan Gabriel, if it's somebody they draft next year potentially with one of those first round picks or package them together to get the franchise quarterback. That's the only person or player that I can think of down the line that would quickly be able to reach like Nick Chubb status in terms of how polarizing they are with a fan base. He was the face of the team by all accounts. Like there's no other way to slice it. I can tell you, like, he was my favorite player to watch, hands down, every single week. And I understand there's other faces on this team. There's Myles Garrett, there's Denzel Ward, but like Myles Garrett's relationship with the fans, we saw sort of become, I don't want to say tainted, but they're like he went out and requested the trade, and I think we saw some of the true feelings on Myles from certain people, and they want to see more from him, and people saying he's not a good leader and all these different things like that. There was never a doubt about that with Chubb. So even the status that Myles Garrett holds as a guy that's going to be wearing a gold jacket one day, Chubb surpassed that, and so it is going to be weird not seeing him with the Browns. I wanted to see him finish his career here. I think everybody listening to this, you probably wanted to see him finish his career here. And, I think also there's already been plenty of signs that the Browns are rebuilding at this stage of where they're at. This one, though, I think all but closes the door on an era of Browns football that included multiple playoff appearances, celebrations that this city just hadn't seen in quite some time. I mean, the beer fridge night with Baker Mayfield coming out and like leading the charge. I know that night was more about Baker, but like Nick Chubb was at the forefront of all those things. Everyone thought Baker was going to sort of be the face of the franchise moving forward. And then once they traded him, like Chubb was the guy that sort of outlasted him. And Chubb was the guy that I think resonated even more than Baker did. So, it's this to me officially signifies the start of this new era for the Browns, where whatever it ends up being, it's without Nick Chubb, and he got here and it felt like there was so much promise for this organization. I think they showed that in 2020 when they made the playoffs. He got here and there was, he became the sort of beating heart of the franchise that gave fans something they hadn't seen in quite some time. And it's not an era fans are going to forget anytime soon, because for many, like there's a generation of fans that is the era that they'll remember in terms of seeing winning. I know there's the glory days, older Browns fans, which you might be one, thinking back to like the Cardiac Kids and all those fun teams like in the early 90s and all that as well with Bernie. But there's an era, there's a generation of fan that this was their player. He represented this era of the team. And so now this new era gets ushered in without Nick Chubb. And so as much as we've all kind of had to come to grips with the fact that this team is in a bit of a rebuild and that they are, transitioning from what was to what is, Chubb, the Chubb news, I think officially slams the door on whatever that previous era is going to be remembered as, and sets the stage for this new era that's being ushered in by the changes that were made this offseason and this regime. And at some point, maybe a franchise quarterback. We'll see. But yes, Nick Chubb will be donning, it sounds like, a Houston Texans uniform next year. We're not done talking about Nick Chubb, though, because with the Nick Chubb era coming to an end here in Cleveland, I think it's only fitting that we rank my favorite Nick Chubb moments. You might have a different list. You're more than welcome to share and dispute mine, but I'll share my top 5 Nick Chubb moments with you coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place, so you can stop just managing your money and start building wealth. You can take advantage of their all-in-one convenience where instead of having to juggle multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spend, and even plan long-term goals all in one place. And managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. I can tell you that as my wife and I tried to financially plan around certain things and trips we were trying to plan and having, starting our family and growing our family, these types of conversations get tough sometimes. And with Monarch Money, we're able to cut some spending some places, find areas where we thought we were saving that we could have been saving more, and even find some areas where we thought we had canceled subscriptions or whatever it might be. And now we save more money because of it. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. All right, the Nick Chubb fanfare continues. It is going to be unfortunate that he is no longer with the Cleveland Browns, but we can still reminisce. We can still look back and remember the good times with Nick Chubb and some of our most memorable moments of his tenure. And there are some good ones that I had to leave off this list. I left off his massive game against the Raiders, where he had like 3 carries and like 160 yards or 140 yards or whatever the hell it was, like in the blink of an eye, because he ripped off 2 big touchdown runs. Didn't have room for it because I had 5 other moments that I thought were higher on my list in terms of ones that I will remember and that will stand out in my mind. And so we start, of course, bottom of the list to the top of the list, number 5 on my list, Nick Chubb. This is kind of a fun one. People are going to think this is too fluky, and they probably would put that Raiders game on there over this. But Nick Chubb running out of bounds against the Texans in Week 10 of 2020. I part of the reason I highlight this is because it was the playoff season. And in the end, like a decision like that comes into play in terms of your record and how you finish the season and where they ended up in terms of the standings and all that. And so Nick Chubb doing that was a smart thing to do to help preserve what ended up being a season that ended with a trip to the playoffs. Obviously, the playoff win over the Steelers, as everyone remembers so fondly. So, but I also put this one on here because it was like peak Nick Chubb, smartest guy in the field, always knew like when to make the right play and what the right play was. He runs out of bounds to make sure that the Texans can't get the ball back so they can kneel it out instead of scoring the touchdown. I know there were probably some bettors that in real time were upset that he didn't score the touchdown because they missed their cover, but it was a smart football play from Nick Chubb, and that just, I thought, speaks to the type of player that he was. He always seemed to make the right play, be in the right place at the right time, and then his football IQ was massively high, and it was another reason why fans adored him. So number 5 for me was him running out of bounds against the Texans in Week 10 of the 2020 season. Staying in the 2020 season, and I kind of, as I've thought about this more, feel like this should have been maybe higher on the list, and I feel like people are probably going to put this higher on their list potentially. But the Nick Chubb screen pass touchdown against the Steelers in that wild card game in 2020, at the time it made the score 42-23, which the final score ended up being 48-37. And so you had this moment from Nick Chubb where it's essentially he scored the game-winning touchdown because you held off the Steelers. They got to 37. That was the one that sort of put the Browns over the top to hold them off. Had they not scored even that other touchdown, that made them get to 48. And so, listen, that Steelers playoff game is etched in Cleveland lore forever. It's etched in the minds of Browns fans forever. And for Nick Chubb to be the guy who sort of scores the game-winning touchdown there in that respect, I think stands out. And him being part of that iconic moment, because beating the Steelers on their home field is the last time they beat the Steelers on their home field and the first time they beat them on their home field in a while. And it was in a playoff game, your first playoff appearance in, forever. It was a memorable moment. It was cool that Chubb sort of got to punctuate it that way. And that one has to be on the list. Anything related to that 2020 playoff run, I think, is going to be something that is easily in the top 5 for most fans. So if that's not on your list, shame on you. But you're welcome to share your list, obviously, in the comment section. You can hit me up on Twitter as well, at @Spency2_, just as a reminder. That brings us to the top 3. We got 3 plays left, 3 moments left. And 3 for me, and this is where I think people are, again, with what my number 4 was, I think people are going to dispute that this should be 3. Like maybe I should switch these. But, and you could throw recency bias in there for this one as well. But the game winning touchdown he scored against the Steelers. Steelers are involved again last year in the snow globe game. I mean, with the vibes that were in that building, you get the snow coming down the way that it was in the blizzard, had that snow globe effect as I alluded to, and places going nuts. And you get Chubb scoring a touchdown, the game-winning touchdown in that game. And listen, in a season that was forgettable and disappointing on so many levels, that moment was just like this euphoria for Browns fans where they were almost like removed from the disaster that was 2024 of a season and could just kind of feel the vibes of a win in one of the coolest settings that a football game can ever be played in. I don't like that. That's a hard thing to top. I get if someone wants to put the playoff touchdown ahead of that for Chubb, I get that. I'm not going to push back on that. I'll give you the nod on that. I can wrap my head around it. But for me, like being there and seeing that moment and experiencing it in real time, and again, it felt like for one night at least, fans could forget about how bad the season had been and everything that had transpired before that, how bad the Deshaun Watson deal was looking, and now he was done for the season. Like all those things just kind of went to the back burner, and fans had something to celebrate. And it was Chubb scoring 2 touchdowns that night, by the way, but also the game winner to beat the Steelers on Thursday Night Football. And again, that's one of those games they'll be highlighting forever. Like in the snow, such a cool thing, something that you only get to experience maybe once in your life. And so I had to put that one on there. It was pretty high for me. It was a cool moment. And again, you could argue recency bias, but I like that one at 3. Final 2 here. Number 2 is his record 92-yard touchdown run against the Falcons. This was in 2018 that he ripped that one off. And frankly, like I think what makes this one for me is the fact that it was the call from Jim Donovan, because Jim Donovan had the iconic Chubba Wubba Hub call, and that for me, I think like accentuated this one is one that has to be high in the list because it was an incredible run by Chubb, a franchise record 92 yards. It was in 2018, again, his first season. And it was like his coming out, his like bursting onto the scene of like, okay, this guy, they got to get him touches, to give him the ball. Good things happen when you give this Nick Chubb guy the ball. And for him to do that in that moment and then have it punctuated with the Jim Donovan call there, an iconic one that we'll be playing forever. The late Jim Donovan. I did that one still like stay like when I think of Nick Chubb, that honestly is the first thing I think of. But as I went back through and just kind of like thought through some things, I didn't quite make it number 1. But it's up there for me because of how cool that moment was and the call that you got from Jim Donovan on it as well. And then that brings us to number 1, which is more of it's less of like I shouldn't say that because it's kind of it's a 2 for 1. This is a 2 for 1. Him running out of the tunnel last year, week 7 against the Bengals, and then scoring a touchdown, which if I remember correctly, the touchdown came on it ended the drive that Deshaun had just gotten hurt on, and the stadium went nuts for Chubb. I know that was a darker day for the fans in general because of the situation with Deshaun, but to have a Nick Chubb sort of moment there, he scores first game back after the gruesome knee injury, all that. You really got this, like you could feel the love and support for him in that moment. And it was just for him, like coming back from that, the grind that it took to get back out there and play again was grueling and brutal. And for him to even be back on the field was remarkable. So I don't know. I got some chills seeing him run out of the tunnel that game, and then seeing him score later was just kind of like the cherry on top. So I put that one number 1 because I think like his career could have been over. And the fact that he was back out there and doing it for the city of Cleveland, and that they showed their love and support for him the way that you tend to do was pretty awesome. So that's my list, my top 5 Nick Chubb moments. If you have a better list, if you want to change my list, if you want to tweak it, you are more than welcome to do so. Like I said, jump in the comment section at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. Hit me up on Twitter at @Spencito_. Different ways you can get a hold of me and share your list with me. Coming up, though, Andrew Berry used the R word, and he seemed pretty comfortable saying it. What does it mean? We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Epicor. Every team knows the value of hard work on taking pride in what you build and in practicing every detail to get the best results. But no one player, no matter how amazing, can do it all alone. Working together makes getting the win easier. At Epicor, the all-stars are the hardworking manufacturers and distributors who create and deliver the things we all need, from aerospace to electrical to medical devices. Epicor ERP solutions are created by industry experts to help make every day easier. Seeing your whole supply chain is easier. Managing logistics is easier. Responding to price changes is easier. From small businesses with big dreams to growing enterprises with a global vision, we'll equip you with the right tools to move forward, think ahead, and lead the way. Because as the clock ticks down, you need to make the most of every hardworking minute. Easier doesn't cut corners. Easier takes the lead. Discover your success at www.easierwithepicor.com. That's www.easierwithepicor.com. All right, so Andrew Berry, Browns GM, had some interesting comments on a recent appearance on CBS Sports with the First Pick podcast, which is hosted by Ryan Wilson and former Titans GM Rand Carthen. Good to know that Rand Carthen landed on his feet doing a podcast at CBS. I did not know that about him, so I learned that. But I also learned some interesting things from Andrew Berry, who was on with James Gladstone, the new and young GM of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And they were talking about sort of how they consummated the draft night trade that saw Jacksonville move up to number 2 to take Travis Hunter, and the Browns trade back to 5 and ultimately end up with Mason Graham and a first-round pick next year. And so there's a couple different comments here, but the one that stood out was he was talking about like the different paths that they sort of could take to move forward with the number 2 overall pick. And he said, quote, one of the alternative paths is you take a non-quarterback, potentially the best player in the draft with Travis, someone the league really hasn't seen before in terms of a two-way player. And he had just talked about, by the way, taking a quarterback before that. Then the third avenue, and it's interesting that he mentions one specific team here, which you've seen teams like Philadelphia and Detroit do. Philadelphia, a team that Andrew Berry came from. He has his shrine of Howie Roseman somewhere at his house. He's trying to take the Philadelphia route here. The Super Bowl champions, the reigning Super Bowl champions. How do you get there? You follow the lead of Philadelphia, I suppose. And he continued, where you're able to take a very good player, but significantly increase the amount of resources you have to rebuild your team. Key phrase there, over a multi-year horizon. And he added later on, like, I remember telling James, we're in a position where we're going to either take a quarterback or we'll take the best player in the draft. For us to move the pick, it's got to be something significant that really helps our organization over the long run. He also added, for us, where our team's life cycle was, we felt like that was the best or the real meaningful opportunity for us to get another very good player, but really replenish the resources we have to build the team over the next this year and next. And so the phrase of, first of all, he used the word rebuild, the R word, that I feel like GMs generally try to avoid. He also talked in that second sort of quote about the life cycle of the team and replenishing resources to build the team over this year and next year. And those are all things and terminology and phrases that would suggest he knows where they're at. He knows they're in a rebuild, and he knows that this team has a way to go before they're going to be really back on that Super Bowl contention stage yet again, or try to get back to that stage. And so they're trying to sort of sort those things out and figure that out. And that was what went into the math of making that trade in the first place and ended up with Mason Graham and passing on Travis Hunter. And so I'm less worried, though, because I know people have talked about this, like, are the Browns going to regret not taking Travis Hunter? Because there's been, OTA highlights of him making some tremendous plays. And they might look back one day and Travis Hunter might be a bona fide Hall of Famer, and they might be like, dang, we should have taken him. Who knows? If they end up with the quarterback that they've always dreamed of, no one's going to be the wiser, because you end up with the quarterback of your dreams. Like, that's what the game's about. But what I thought was interesting about these comments in particular, other than the fact that he said the word rebuild, which again, I feel like is so taboo with GMs, he's admitting that it's another person, first of all, admitting that that's where the team is. And so that should sort of set the tone for the season, even though I know they're going to try to be competitive. You're never going to tell the players that you're rebuilding and just like tanking a season. Obviously, that's not the point. but I do think it was telling that he made these comments, and the thing that stood out to me is like how comfortably he made these comments. This wasn't a situation where he was just like beating around the bush. Like he comfortably said in those quotes, rebuild over the next couple years, and the life cycle of our team, where we're at, we had more resources now to rebuild or to build our roster this year and next year. That is a guy who is talking like he feels comfortable he's going to be back in 2026. And I get it. Listen, things can change. I've talked about this several months ago. I talked about the idea that like, is there this, or are they guaranteed 2026? Him and Andrew and Kevin Stefanski. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, Jimmy Haslam has sat down with these guys and said, you're safe for next year as well. I don't think that's it. But you hear Jimmy Haslam say at the owners' meetings, we made this Deshaun trade. It was a big swing and a miss. We got to dig ourselves out of this. You hear Andrew Berry talking about how the thought process at the draft was, how do we get resources to build the roster this year and next year? That these are people who are speaking as if this thing is going to be together, and they're going to be given some leeway here to get themselves out of the situation that they find themselves in with Deshaun Watson and see how they come out the other side. If that's what they're doing, 1 year isn't going to cut it, because the roster's in bad shape right now. It's an aging roster. Financially, they're strapped. You kind of need that next year to really set yourself up with 2 years worth of draft picks that you finally have first rounders, by the way, to build around and add into the mix. And then on top of that, like maybe finally you find your quarterback next year, or maybe you found him this year in the draft, if it's Shador, or if it's Dylan Gabriel. So you need to give yourself a chance to kind of learn that before you just like pull the plug. And so, yes, there's always factors that could mean Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry are looking for jobs at the end of the season. If this season goes disastrous and they finish with like 3 wins again, or if they finish with less wins than that, and or Kevin Stefanski, for example, and this is what I always say with coaches, the biggest number one thing that will tell you if a coach is safe or not is if he loses his locker room. If the locker room seems like they quit on him, he could be gone and nobody would even bat an eye, because that's the biggest kiss of death you can have as a coach, is if you lose your players in the locker room. So yes, like those things could change. That could happen at some point. And if they have a disastrous season again, 3 wins or less, yeah, I think anything's on the table for this group. I'm not saying that Jimmy Haslam's promised them anything, but it does feel like from those comments from Andrew Berry, he's operating under this premise that like he's going to be given time to fix this thing. And he was thinking not about just this year, but also about next year in terms of how they're going to construct this roster, how they're going to build this roster, and how they're going to get themselves out of the quote-unquote hole that they put themselves in with the Deshaun Watson deal that they made and then the contract that they gave him. So I'm just saying, it feels like that is where the place they're operating from. We'll see how the season plays out and what it means for him and Kevin Stefanski. But I'm kind of going into the season assuming that like they're going to be back at it next year and be given an opportunity to rebuild this roster unless things go terribly, terribly wrong this year. But again, if with the over-under is 5.5, if they get to 6 wins, 7 wins, which I've argued they could do, I'm sure I got a good feeling they're going to be back next year. That's just how it seems like it's setting up. And it seems like Andrew Berry feels that way too, the way he's kind of flippantly talking about rebuilding. And that's not a problem. Like I get if that's how he feels, and that's if he feels comfortable in his job status. And he has said before, like he can't operate from a place of like, I'm worried about my job anyway. So it's not that I think he's thinking about those things, but just you making comments like that lead me to believe like, they weren't put under any pressure to like find the quarterback this year or like get a certain win total this year. They're gonna, it seems like, have some patience on their side from the ownership to get this thing righted, and we'll see what that looks like. Another episode down with you, Dog Pound. Thank you for joining me as always to talk about your favorite football team. More to come this week, of course. We got mandatory mini camps starting up on Tuesday. I'll give you some insights into what I'm kind of looking for, what I'm hoping to see. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make Locked On Browns your first listen every day. For your second listen, you can check out Locked On NFL Scouting or keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. I'll talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. See ya.